I used to believe water remembered every hand that protected it. Standing on the cracked shoreline of my family's reservoir that morning, I realized it also remembered every hand that betrayed it. The first thing I heard wasn't birds or wind. It was the relentless growl of industrial diesel pumps echoing across the valley like engines chewing through 40 years of my father's work. The smell hit me before I even shut off my truck. Wet clay, hot hydraulic oil, and the sharp metallic scent of machinery that had no business being on my land. My boots sank into mud that should have been 12 feet underwater. Something was terribly wrong. The reservoir stretched across nearly 200 acres, or at least it used to. Now an ugly ring of cracked earth wrapped around its edges like an open wound. Dead fish glistened beneath the morning sun. Broken reeds leaned sideways in the drying shoreline. A pair of herons circled once before flying away, as if they already knew this place wasn't home anymore. I felt my stomach tighten with every step toward the dam. Then I saw them. 3 massive trailer-mounted pumps stood beside the spillway, their exhaust pouring black smoke into the cool morning air. Thick hoses disappeared into the remaining water, dragging thousands of gallons downstream every minute. Workers in orange safety vests moved around casually, laughing as though they were finishing an ordinary construction project. None of them looked worried. None of them looked guilty. And standing above all of them, wearing a spotless white golf outfit and mirrored sunglasses, was Karen Whitmore. She rested one hand on the steel railing of my dam, while sipping coffee from a stainless tumbler with the HOA logo printed across the side. She wasn't supervising. She was celebrating. The moment she noticed me walking toward the spillway, a smile slowly spread across her face. Not the kind people wear when greeting a neighbor. It was the smile of someone convinced the game was already over. "Well," she called out before I could even speak, her voice carrying effortlessly over the rumbling engines. "Look who finally decided to come home." I stopped 20 feet away, trying to process what I was seeing. The waterline had dropped so far that concrete inspection markers built into the dam decades ago were fully exposed. My father used to tell me those markers should never see daylight unless the reservoir was being serviced under strict engineering supervision. Nobody had my permission. Nobody even called me. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. Karen tilted her head, pretending to be surprised. "We're improving the community." She gestured toward the draining reservoir as though she were unveiling a luxury resort. "People have been asking for paddle boats, lakeside walking trails, picnic areas. Honestly, this old reservoir was wasting valuable waterfront potential." I stared at her, unable to believe the words coming out of her mouth. "This reservoir isn't HOA property." "It is now," she replied with a shrug. "We're close enough." A few workers chuckled. One of them climbed down beside the control house carrying a long steel wrench. My eyes followed him instinctively until they stopped on the old bronze discharge valve mounted into the concrete wall. The valve. My father had installed that emergency control assembly back in 1984 after a record flood nearly destroyed the lower valley. Every bolt, every weld, every maintenance log had been documented. I knew that valve better than most people knew their own front door. The locking seal was gone. Fresh scratches covered the brass housing. Someone had forced it open. A wave of cold anger settled over me. Not explosive anger. Worse, the kind that becomes perfectly quiet. Karen noticed me staring at the damaged mechanism. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she laughed. "Your little pond will fill back up next rainy season." Little pond. $8 million of privately engineered water infrastructure. Decades of irrigation planning. Emergency fire protection. Wildlife habitat. Every drop disappearing because one HOA president believed landscaping mattered more than ownership. I reached into my pocket and unlocked my phone without taking my eyes off the dam. Karen mistook the movement for surrender. "If you're calling a lawyer," she said confidently, "save your money. Our attorneys already approved everything." I almost smiled. Because I wasn't calling a lawyer. I was opening the security archive connected to the hidden cameras my father insisted on installing years before he died. And before the sun went down, every second of what Karen had done would become evidence she could never erase. My name is Ethan Walker, and if you asked anyone in Pine Ridge County what my family owned, they'd probably point toward the reservoir before they pointed toward our farmhouse. Around here, people didn't measure distance by roads. They measured it by water. "Turn left at Walker Reservoir," they'd say. "Drive until you see the old dam." That reservoir wasn't just another body of water on a map. It was the reason 3 neighboring farms survived every dry summer for nearly 4 decades. My father, Richard Walker, never called himself an engineer, even though everyone else did. He was the kind of man who believed a blueprint meant nothing if you couldn't hold a wrench. I can still remember the rough texture of his work gloves brushing against my shoulder while we stood on top of the dam during inspections. Every spring, we'd walk the entire crest together. He'd stop every 20 yards, tap the concrete with a small steel hammer, close his eyes, and simply listen. Concrete talks, he'd always tell me. I thought he was joking when I was 10 years old. By the time I turned 30, I understood exactly what he meant. He spent 12 years designing and expanding that reservoir one permit, one retaining wall, and one drainage upgrade at a time. Nothing happened by accident. Every pipe beneath the spillway had a purpose. Every emergency overflow channel had been calculated to protect families living miles downstream. The reservoir wasn't simply valuable because an appraiser once estimated it at $8 million. It was valuable because it quietly protected hundreds of lives every time a heavy storm rolled through the valley. When my father passed away 6 years ago, people assumed he had left me money. He hadn't. He left me responsibility. Boxes filled with engineering drawings. Maintenance journals dating back to 1984. Water rights older than most neighborhoods in the county. Inspection reports stacked so neatly they looked like military records. He even left handwritten notes tucked inside faded binders. If you're reading this, one note began, something probably broke. Don't panic. Read before you react. That sentence saved me more than once. I wasn't some wealthy land baron like Karen loved telling everyone during HOA meetings. I earned my living as a civil engineer specializing in flood control infrastructure. Most weeks I was somewhere across the state inspecting levees, repairing aging spillways, or helping counties prepare for storm season. My work often kept me away from home for days at a time, but every Friday evening, no matter how tired I was, I'd drive straight to the reservoir before I unlocked my front door. Some people checked on family. I checked on water. I'd climb onto the old observation platform, breathe in the clean scent of pine drifting across the surface, and listen to the slow rhythm of small waves tapping against the riprap lining. It was the only place where the constant noise inside my head ever disappeared. The wildlife trusted that reservoir long before people did. White-tailed deer came just before sunrise. Blue herons nested near the eastern marsh every spring. Foxes crossed the western bank almost every evening at dusk. Even the volunteer fire department depended on it. During wildfire season, helicopters regularly filled their buckets from the deepest section near the dam. Every gallon mattered. Karen Whitmore never seemed to understand any of that. To her, water wasn't infrastructure. It wasn't environmental protection. It wasn't decades of engineering. It was empty real estate waiting to become someone's waterfront view. Months before I found the pumps running, she'd approached me during an HOA meeting carrying colorful architectural renderings rolled beneath her arm. She spread them across the conference table with the excitement of someone unveiling a luxury resort. Boardwalks, kayak rentals, floating docks, outdoor concerts, a lakeside cafe. She pointed to each illustration with perfectly manicured fingernails while smiling as if she were offering me a gift. Think about how much property values would increase, she said. People don't want an industrial reservoir anymore. They want an experience. I looked at the drawings, then at her. The reservoir isn't for entertainment, I answered quietly. It's part of an engineered flood control system. She laughed. You engineers always make everything sound so complicated. Maybe she was right. Engineering is complicated. Gravity is complicated. Water is complicated. The law protecting privately owned infrastructure is even more complicated. Karen believed she was looking at an oversized lake. I was looking at 40 years of calculations holding back millions of gallons of water. Neither of us realized that one conversation would eventually become the first exhibit in a courtroom where every word she had spoken would come back to haunt her. If my father believed water had a memory, Karen Whitmore believed people didn't. That was the only explanation I could find for the way she carried herself around our neighborhood. She walked every sidewalk like she owned the county, clipboard tucked beneath one arm, oversized sunglasses hiding eyes that were always searching for someone else's mistake. You could hear her golf cart before you saw it. The quiet electric hum would drift down the street every Saturday morning. followed by the sweet smell of expensive perfume that somehow never covered the scent of fresh printer ink from another stack of violation notices. Karen wasn't born into power. She manufactured it. 5 years earlier, Pine Ridge Estates had been a quiet subdivision filled with retirees, young families, and people who simply wanted peaceful weekends. The HOA barely existed beyond collecting annual dues and paying for streetlights. Then Karen ran for president. Her campaign slogan was almost laughable now: protecting property values through community excellence. People applauded. They voted for her. Within 6 months, the neighborhood had changed. Mailbox inspections, grass measurements, approved flower colors, fence paint regulations, holiday decoration deadlines. Even garbage cans had assigned hours when they were allowed to be visible from the street. Some neighbors rolled their eyes. Others quietly paid the fines. Most simply stopped arguing because fighting Karen consumed more energy than surrendering. She understood something dangerous. Small victories teach bullies to expect bigger ones. Every month her authority expanded just a little further beyond what the HOA bylaws actually allowed. By the time anyone questioned her, people had already accepted her version of reality. I rarely attended HOA meetings unless an engineering project required coordination with neighboring properties. My schedule usually kept me away, and honestly, I preferred spending weekends repairing culverts over debating mailbox colors with people who had never held a shovel. Karen interpreted my absence as weakness. "You really should participate more," she once told me after cornering me outside the grocery store. "I participate by paying my dues." She smiled. "But communities require leadership." "No," I answered. "Communities require neighbors." Her smile disappeared for just a second. That tiny crack in her polished confidence told me more than any argument ever could. Karen didn't want cooperation. She wanted obedience. Not long afterward, strange things started happening near the reservoir. Families wandered onto my maintenance roads carrying fishing poles. Teenagers parked beside emergency access gates. Someone even installed handmade signs reading "Future Community Lakefront." I removed them the same afternoon. 3 days later, new signs appeared, this time laminated, professionally printed. The first real confrontation happened on an unusually warm Saturday in early May. I was inspecting one of the outlet channels when Karen drove up in her golf cart with 4 HOA board members following behind like a political parade. Their shoes stayed perfectly clean while mine were covered in mud halfway to my knees. Karen unfolded a glossy presentation board across the hood of her cart. "I think you're going to love this." I already knew I wasn't. The rendering showed walking trails circling my reservoir, wooden docks extending into protected habitat, a floating stage, picnic shelters, decorative lighting, even fireworks scheduled over the water on Independence Day. She pointed at each feature with genuine excitement. "Can you imagine summer concerts here?" I looked past the drawing toward the actual reservoir. A pair of blue herons stood motionless in the reeds. Behind them sat the intake structure feeding irrigation lines to 3 neighboring farms. None of that appeared anywhere on her plans. "You forgot something," I said. "What?" "The reservoir." She frowned. "It is the reservoir." "No, that's a resort." One of the board members laughed nervously. Karen didn't. "We've already spoken with several homeowners," she continued. "Everyone agrees the lake is being underutilized." "It's not a lake." She sighed dramatically. "Ethan, normal people don't care about technical definitions." I stepped closer until we were standing on opposite sides of the blueprint. "Normal people care when floodwater reaches their living room." Nobody spoke. The breeze carried the scent of pine across the shoreline. Somewhere behind us, the emergency spillway released a slow trickle of water exactly as it had every spring since my father designed it. Karen rolled up the drawings with a sharp snap. "You're standing in the way of progress." "No," I answered quietly. "I'm standing in front of a dam." She climbed back into her golf cart without another word, but before driving away, she looked over her shoulder one last time. "You'll change your mind." The strange part wasn't what she said. It was how certain she sounded. Looking back now, I realized she wasn't making a prediction. She was revealing a plan that had already begun moving behind the scenes, long before I heard the first diesel pump echo across my father's reservoir. The first clue that Karen had stopped asking for permission came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was inspecting a flood control channel nearly 80 miles away. My phone vibrated 3 times in less than a minute. I ignored the first call, thinking it was another contractor with a scheduling problem. Then a fourth call came in. This time it was my neighbor, Bill Harper. "Ethan," he said without even saying hello, "there are excavators at your reservoir." I stopped walking. "What kind of excavators?" "The kind that don't belong there." The line went quiet except for the sound of wind rushing through his truck window. "And Karen's here." I felt a knot form in my stomach. By the time I opened the security app connected to the hidden cameras around the dam, the first live image appeared on my screen. Karen stood beside two pickup trucks wearing a bright yellow safety vest over perfectly pressed clothes. She looked less like an HOA president and more like someone directing a commercial construction project. She was pointing toward the spillway. Workers nodded. One of them carried bolt cutters. Another unloaded heavy hoses from a flatbed trailer. I zoomed in. The emergency access gate had been chained shut the previous weekend. Now the chain lay on the ground in two pieces. My father used to say that people reveal their intentions the moment they damage a lock. A locked gate means they know they don't belong. Cutting it means they've already decided the rules don't apply to them. I called Karen immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Oh, Ethan," she said cheerfully. "I was just about to call you." "No, you weren't." A brief silence followed. "I can see your crew on my cameras." "They're not my crew. They're standing next to you." "They're contractors." "Hired by who?" She laughed softly. "The association. You don't have authority over my reservoir. We're performing improvements. You broke into private property. We entered community infrastructure. That's not community infrastructure." "It will be." The call ended before I could answer. She hung up. Not me. That single detail stayed with me, because people who know they're right rarely end conversations first. I spent the next 3 hours driving home faster than I probably should have. Every mile seemed longer than the last. The farther I drove, the more notifications filled my phone. Motion detected. Vehicle detected. Gate opened. Equipment moving. Camera 4. Camera 6. Camera 8. Each alert felt like another page being added to a report no engineer ever wants to write. Just before sunset, I pulled onto the county road overlooking the valley. Even from nearly a mile away, I could hear the machinery. The low mechanical growl echoed across the hills, bouncing off the water and rolling through the pine trees. It wasn't loud enough to sound dramatic. It was worse. It sounded routine, like everyone involved believed what they were doing was completely normal. As I parked on the overlook, I raised my binoculars. 3 diesel pumps had already been positioned beside the spillway. Temporary fuel tanks sat nearby. Extension lights had been erected even though darkness hadn't fallen yet. Someone expected the work to continue through the night. Then I noticed another detail. A county utility logo had been magnetically attached to one of the trucks. At first glance it looked official. Too official. I zoomed in with my camera. The logo wasn't painted. It was a removable magnetic panel. Fake. Someone had deliberately dressed private contractors to resemble government workers. That wasn't just trespassing anymore. Someone wanted witnesses to believe the operation had legal authority. Cars slowed on the county road. Drivers glanced toward the activity. Most kept going. Why wouldn't they? If trucks carried official markings and workers wore reflective safety gear, who would question it? Karen understood something about appearances. People trust uniforms long before they verify credentials. As dusk settled over the valley, the diesel engines finally roared to full power. The first discharge pipe trembled violently. Seconds later, a thick stream of water burst from the outlet and crashed into the drainage channel below. Another pipe joined it. Then another. Millions of gallons that had taken decades to store began rushing away in a matter of hours. The surface of the reservoir rippled strangely before settling into a slow, almost invisible decline. Most people would never have noticed. I did, because my father had taught me exactly where to look. The concrete elevation marker near the western intake. It had been underwater my entire life. Now, inch by inch, the top edge emerged from beneath the surface. The reservoir wasn't simply losing water. It was bleeding. And somewhere behind those diesel engines, Karen Whitmore stood smiling, convinced she had already won. She had no idea that every camera surrounding the dam had been recording continuously since the first pair of bolt cutters touched my gate. I did what every reasonable property owner is told to do. I called the sheriff before I confronted anyone. Deputy Mark Ellis arrived just after sunrise the next morning. His cruiser rolled slowly down the gravel access road while the diesel pumps continued roaring in the background. The contrast almost felt absurd. One man with a notepad facing an operation involving millions of gallons of water disappearing by the hour. He stepped out, removed his sunglasses, and looked across the reservoir. "Damn," he muttered. That single word told me he understood something wasn't normal. I walked him toward the spillway, showing him the broken chain, the cut lock, the damaged valve housing, and the contractors moving around equipment that had no business being there. "I never authorized any of this," I said. He nodded while writing notes. Then Karen appeared. She didn't walk toward us. She strolled, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other, perfectly composed. "Good morning, Deputy," she said with a warm smile that seemed practiced. "I'm glad you're here. We've already explained everything to the county." My head turned. "The county?" Karen handed him a thick folder. "Our legal counsel prepared documentation." Deputy Ellis spent several minutes flipping through pages. HOA meeting minutes, landscape proposals, vendor contracts, letters from residents asking for better recreational amenities. Everything looked official. Everything except the one document that actually mattered. There wasn't a single page proving the HOA owned my reservoir. "Do you have the property deed?" I asked calmly. Karen ignored me. "The association has broad authority over common improvements." "This isn't a common improvement." She smiled without looking at me. "It depends how you define community." Deputy Ellis finally closed the folder. "This appears to be a civil property dispute." I stared at him. "They broke my gate. They admit entering the property. They're draining private infrastructure." He sighed. "I'm not saying I agree with what's happening." "Then stop it." "I can't." The words landed harder than I expected. "When ownership is disputed," he continued carefully, "this becomes something the courts usually decide. There isn't a dispute." I pulled digital copies of my deed onto my phone. The recorded easements, the survey, the county plat map, the original water right permits. He studied them quietly. "I understand," he said, "but I'm not authorized to determine ownership on site." Karen couldn't hide her satisfaction. She had counted on exactly this outcome. Not because she was legally correct, because she knew hesitation favors the person already causing damage. By the time lawyers sort things out, the damage is usually done. As the deputy drove away, another truck arrived. Then another. Fuel deliveries, replacement hoses, portable generators. This wasn't an emergency response. It was a fully funded operation. By noon, the reservoir had dropped several more inches. The muddy shoreline expanded like a growing scar. Fish struggled in shrinking pools. Turtles abandoned nesting areas. The eastern marsh, where blue herons returned every spring, was already turning into cracked earth. I called the County Water Resources office. After 42 minutes on hold, an engineer answered. He listened patiently, asked intelligent questions, requested photographs. Then he said something that almost made me hopeful. "If what you're describing is accurate, someone shouldn't be operating those discharge controls." Finally, someone understood. An hour later, he called back. "I've reviewed the records available to us, and there are ownership questions outside our authority." I closed my eyes. "So nobody is going to stop this?" "I'm afraid our office can't issue an immediate shutdown." Every conversation ended the same way. Call another agency. Contact another office. File another complaint. Meanwhile, the pumps never stopped. That evening, I met with the first attorney recommended by a friend. His office overlooked the courthouse square. Shelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes lined every wall. After listening for nearly an hour, he leaned back in his chair. "You could settle." I blinked. "Settle? The HOA may agree to compensate you for temporary use. They're destroying a flood control reservoir. I'm trying to give you the fastest solution." Fastest? Not right. Not legal. Just fast. I thanked him for his time, stood up, and walked out without signing a single document. Outside, the courthouse clock struck 6. The summer air smelled of rain that hadn't arrived yet. For the first time since returning home, I realized I was completely alone. The sheriff couldn't stop them. The county wouldn't stop them. The first lawyer wanted compromise. Karen believed every closed door proved she was untouchable. She didn't know something my father had spent 40 years teaching me. When engineering fails, you inspect deeper. When the law seems to fail, you read deeper. Because somewhere inside thousands of pages of permits, maintenance records, easements, inspection reports, and engineering drawings, there had to be one document everyone else had overlooked. And when I unlocked the oldest filing cabinet in my father's workshop that night, covered in decades of dust, I found a faded binder labeled simply, Emergency Control System, 1984. The moment I opened the first page, I knew Karen Whitmore had made a mistake far bigger than cutting a lock or draining a reservoir. She had interfered with infrastructure protected under rules she didn't even know existed. The binder smelled exactly the way I remembered my father's workshop. Old paper, machine oil, dust that had settled quietly for decades. I carried it to the workbench beneath the same brass lamp he used every night after dinner. The yellow light spilled across faded engineering drawings, handwritten calculations, and inspection reports that stretched back to the spring of 1984. Every page had his neat block lettering in the upper right corner. Dates, elevations, valve numbers, maintenance schedules. Nothing was decorative. Every line existed because one day, someone might need it. That someone was me. I turned page after page until a folded blueprint slipped onto the floor. It wasn't part of the original construction plans. It was an amendment. Across the top, stamped in dark blue ink, were words I had completely forgotten. Emergency Regional Water Infrastructure Protection Agreement. I unfolded it slowly. The reservoir wasn't classified merely as private property. It had been incorporated decades earlier into the county's emergency drought and wildfire response network through a recorded infrastructure agreement that survived every transfer of ownership. My father never talked about it because he believed nobody would ever be reckless enough to interfere with it. He had underestimated Karen Whitmore. I read every paragraph twice. Then a third time. The agreement was astonishingly specific. No unauthorized person could alter water levels beyond approved engineering limits. No private organization could operate discharge controls. No modification could occur without written approval from multiple agencies. Violations weren't treated as ordinary property disputes. They were considered interference with protected public safety infrastructure. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't angry. I was focused. Karen hadn't simply trespassed. She had crossed into an entirely different category of liability. The binder contained even more. Inspection photographs, structural calculations, maintenance certifications, replacement records for the bronze emergency valve installed in 1984. Every maintenance visit had been signed, every inspection logged, every seal documented, including the serial number stamped onto the locking device Karen's contractors had cut apart. I opened my laptop and connected to the security archive. 8 cameras, continuous recording, every second preserved. Camera 3 captured the first contractor climbing over the locked gate. Camera 5 recorded the bolt cutters slicing through the security chain. Camera 7 showed the maintenance seal being removed from the emergency valve. Then Camera 8 delivered something I hadn't expected. Audio. The microphones normally existed only to monitor equipment noise. Instead, they recorded voices. Karen stood only a few feet away while the contractors hesitated beside the valve. One of them asked, "Shouldn't somebody from the county be here for this?" Karen answered without hesitation, "We don't need permission." Another worker pointed toward the warning plate bolted beside the control housing. "It says emergency infrastructure." Karen laughed. "I'm sure our attorney already reviewed that. Open it." The contractor paused again. "If something goes wrong, nothing's going to happen." Then came the unmistakable sound of a wrench turning against bronze. Metal scraping. Bolts loosening. The protective seal snapping. I stopped the video. Replayed it. Then replayed it again. Those 15 seconds changed everything. Until that moment, this looked like a complicated property dispute. Now it looked like intentional conduct despite explicit warnings. Intent mattered, especially in court. Just after midnight, I called the only person I knew who understood infrastructure law, as well as engineering. Rachel Morrison. We had worked together years earlier on a failed dam rehabilitation project after severe flooding. She answered on the third ring. "Ethan, I'm sorry it's late. If you're calling at midnight, something serious happened." I didn't explain. I emailed the binder, the videos, the maintenance logs, the security recordings. Then I waited. 23 minutes later, my phone rang again. Her voice sounded completely different. "Don't talk to the HOA anymore." I wasn't planning to. Good. She took a breath. "Because this isn't about an HOA." I remained silent. She continued. "They interfered with protected infrastructure." That's what I thought. "No." Her voice hardened. "It's worse than what you think." She began listing everything she had already identified. Unauthorized operation of engineered flood control equipment, destruction of certified safety seals, interference with emergency water reserves, potential environmental damage, economic losses, agricultural impact, possible wildfire response impairment. Every sentence added another layer I hadn't considered. By the time she finished, my notebook contained nearly 2 full pages of potential claims. Then she asked one final question. Tell me something. What? Did Karen know the warning plate was there? I remembered the recording. The contractor reading it aloud. Karen dismissing it. Yes, I answered quietly. Rachel didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her tone carried the calm confidence of someone who had just found the missing piece of a puzzle. Perfect. I frowned. Perfect. Not for her. She paused just long enough for the silence to settle. For us. That was the first moment anyone had said the word us. For 3 exhausting days, I had been fighting alone while everyone else treated the disaster as paperwork waiting to happen. Now I had an attorney who wasn't looking for compromise. She was already building a case. And by sunrise, Karen Whitmore still believed the biggest problem she faced was an angry reservoir owner. She had absolutely no idea that every blueprint, every inspection log, every camera recording, and every sentence she casually spoke beside that emergency valve was about to become the foundation of a lawsuit measured not in thousands, but in millions of dollars. By 6 o'clock the next morning, my father's workshop looked less like a garage and more like a war room. Engineering drawings covered the workbench. County plat maps were pinned to the wall. Satellite images filled one monitor, while security footage looped across another. Coffee cups multiplied faster than I could empty them. Rachel Morrison arrived carrying 2 banker's boxes and a laptop loaded with legal research. She took one slow look around the room before smiling. Good, she said. What? You've already done half my job. She wasn't interested in speeches. She wanted evidence. Real evidence. The kind that survives cross-examination. By noon, our team had quietly grown from 2 people into 6. Rachel brought in Michael Chun, a forensic civil engineer who specialized in dam failures. I contacted Sarah Collins, an environmental scientist who had documented wetland damage throughout the county for nearly 20 years. Bill Harper volunteered every photograph he had taken from his property. Even my drone pilot from a flood mapping project cleared his schedule after hearing what had happened. Nobody came because they disliked Karen. They came because infrastructure had been treated like landscaping. Michael spent nearly 4 hours inspecting the emergency valve. He measured every scratch, photographed every damaged bolt, collected metal fragments from the broken locking seal. Finally, he stood up and removed his safety glasses. This wasn't opened by accident. I know. No, he corrected. Legally. He pointed toward the scoring marks around the valve stem. These wrench marks tell us they applied force after meeting resistance. So whoever opened this knew the safety mechanism was preventing access. Intentional. Another word I was beginning to appreciate. Meanwhile, Sarah walked the shoreline, documenting environmental losses. She counted dead fish trapped in isolated pools, measured the shrinking wetlands, recorded abandoned nesting sites, collected water samples. Every observation entered a digital report with timestamps accurate to the second. Nothing was exaggerated. Facts were powerful enough on their own. The drone launched shortly before sunset. Its quiet electric motors sounded almost peaceful compared to the endless roar of Karen's diesel pumps. Flight after flight, it built a 3-dimensional model of the reservoir. Elevation maps, water loss calculations, shoreline recession, structural exposure. The software reconstructed the reservoir exactly as it existed before the pumping began, then compared it with what remained. The difference looked like a wound spreading across the valley. Rachel stared silently at the screen. They're finished. I looked up. What do you mean? They just don't know it yet. By that evening, we had assembled something much larger than a property damage claim. The evidence connected together like gears inside a clock. Security footage established unauthorized entry. Audio recordings proved Karen ignored explicit warnings. Engineering reports demonstrated structural risk. Environmental studies documented ecological damage. Water right records confirmed ownership. Emergency infrastructure agreements established protected status. Drone surveys quantified physical loss. Nothing depended on opinions. Everything depended on measurable facts. Then Rachel requested one final piece. Subpoena every HOA email. I raised an eyebrow. We don't even have a case number yet. We will. You think they'll say something useful? She laughed softly. Ethan. She leaned against the workbench. People who think they're untouchable always leave a paper trail. 3 days later, the court approved expedited discovery because of the ongoing damage. The first batch of electronic records arrived the following afternoon. Hundreds of emails, meeting notes, board discussions, budget spreadsheets. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Then Bill found one. Subject line, Reservoir Conversion Timeline. Rachel opened the attachment. Silence filled the workshop. Karen had written the message herself. The email outlined every phase of her plan. Drain the reservoir. Install temporary recreation facilities. Pressure Ethan into selling the surrounding land after the property's value declined. The final sentence froze everyone in the room. Asterisk. Once the water is gone, he'll have no choice but to negotiate. Asterisk. No uncertainty. No misunderstanding. No good faith mistake. It wasn't poor judgment. It was strategy. Rachel slowly closed her laptop. I've been practicing infrastructure litigation for 18 years. She looked directly at me. I almost never say this. I waited. She smiled for the first time since walking into my workshop. They built our entire case for us. Outside, the pumps continued pulling water from the reservoir, completely unaware that every gallon disappearing downstream was increasing the damages they would eventually have to answer for. Karen still believed she controlled the narrative because she controlled the machinery. She didn't realize the real machinery had already shifted. It wasn't diesel engines. It was evidence. Every inspection, every measurement, every photograph, every email, every careless sentence she typed believing no one else would ever read it. The reservoir might still have been losing water, but from that moment forward, Karen Whitmore was losing something far more valuable: control. And once someone loses control of the facts, losing the courtroom is only a matter of time. The courthouse was quieter than I expected. No shouting, no television cameras, just the soft shuffle of polished shoes across marble floors and the distant echo of courtroom doors opening and closing. The smell of old wood and fresh coffee drifted through the hallway as Rachel and I walked toward courtroom 3, carrying 4 bankers' boxes that contained nearly 40 years of engineering history. Karen arrived 10 minutes later. She smiled the same confident smile I had seen beside the reservoir. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect confidence. Behind her walked 3 attorneys, each carrying sleek leather briefcases instead of boxes. Watching them, I realized the difference between our 2 sides. They brought arguments. We brought evidence. When the judge entered, every conversation stopped instantly. The courtroom settled into complete silence. Rachel didn't begin with emotion. She didn't talk about my family. She didn't mention my father. Instead, she placed one photograph onto the evidence screen. It showed the emergency valve exactly as it appeared before Karen's contractors arrived. Then she displayed another. The same valve after the locking seal had been cut away. No opinions, she said calmly. Only documented changes. For the next hour, every witness added another piece to the same picture. Michael explained how the discharge system functioned. He enlarged microscopic photographs of the damaged valve stem and pointed to fresh wrench marks. These indicate deliberate mechanical force, he testified. The operator encountered resistance and continued anyway. Sarah followed. She presented maps of shrinking wetlands, charts documenting fish mortality, photographs of abandoned nesting areas. Every conclusion was backed by measurements taken on specific dates. Not one word sounded exaggerated. Then came the drone reconstruction. The courtroom lights dimmed. A 3-dimensional model of the reservoir rotated slowly on the large display. Blue represented the original water level. Red showed what had disappeared after the unauthorized pumping. The visual required no explanation. Even from the gallery, the loss looked enormous. Karen's attorneys objected repeatedly. Speculation, assumption, cumulative. The judge overruled nearly every objection. This witness has established foundation. Overruled. The exhibit will be admitted. Each ruling shifted the atmosphere a little further. The confidence Karen carried into the courtroom slowly began to disappear. Then Rachel said the words she had been saving all morning. Your Honor, we'd like to play Exhibit 42. The speakers came alive. Static. Diesel engines. Wind across the dam. Then the contractor's voice. Shouldn't somebody from the county be here for this? The courtroom remained perfectly still. Karen's recorded reply followed immediately. We don't need permission. A second voice. It says emergency infrastructure. Karen laughed. It's just legal language. Open it. No one moved. The recording continued with the unmistakable metallic crack of the protective seal breaking. Rachel stopped the audio. She didn't need another second. The silence that followed was louder than the recording itself. Karen's lead attorney stood. Those statements have been taken out of context. Rachel nodded politely. Very well. She clicked her remote once more. An email appeared on the courtroom screen. Subject line, Reservoir Conversion Timeline. Every juror leaned forward. Rachel highlighted a single sentence. Asterisk, once the water is gone, he'll have no choice but to negotiate. Asterisk, she didn't read it aloud. She let everyone read it for themselves. Karen stared at the screen without blinking. Her attorney quietly lowered his pen. The judge adjusted his glasses before looking directly toward the defense table. Ms. Whitmore. His voice remained calm. Did you authorize the drainage operation? Karen hesitated. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, she looked uncertain. I approved improvements recommended by the association. Did you authorize opening the emergency valve? Another pause. I relied on others. The judge turned another page. The recording indicates otherwise. No one answered. He continued. The warning plate specifically referenced protected infrastructure. Still nothing. Then came the question that changed the entire hearing. When your contractor expressed concern, why did you instruct him to proceed anyway? Karen opened her mouth, closed it again. Across the room, I realized the engines at the reservoir had finally gone silent 2 days earlier. Now, in this courtroom, the only sound left was the weight of her own decisions catching up with her. The evidence wasn't arguing anymore. It was speaking for itself, and everyone in the room knew exactly whose voice the court was listening to. The judge returned exactly 23 minutes later. No one spoke as he took his seat. The courtroom had changed during the recess. The confidence that had surrounded Karen all morning had disappeared. Her attorneys whispered to one another, flipping through legal pads that no longer seemed to contain the answers they were looking for. Rachel simply closed her notebook and folded her hands. She already knew the evidence had done its job. The judge adjusted the papers in front of him before looking toward the defense table. This court has reviewed the testimony, the engineering reports, the documentary evidence, the recorded communications, and the electronic correspondence submitted during these proceedings. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. The defendant knowingly authorized unauthorized access to privately owned infrastructure. Karen stared straight ahead. The defendant further ignored explicit warnings identifying the discharge system as protected emergency infrastructure. No movement. The resulting damages were foreseeable. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, Karen lowered her eyes. The judge paused long enough for every person in the courtroom to understand that what came next would matter. Judgment is entered in favor of the plaintiff. I didn't react. Neither did Rachel. We had learned throughout the trial that silence often carried more weight than celebration. The judge continued. Compensatory damages are awarded in the amount of $12 million. A quiet gasp swept through the gallery. Karen's attorney slowly removed his glasses. Someone behind me whispered, 12 million. The judge wasn't finished. The court further orders the immediate cessation of all unauthorized activity at the reservoir, restoration of the affected infrastructure under qualified engineering supervision, and reimbursement of litigation costs as permitted by law. His gavel struck once. The sound echoed through the courtroom. That single knock ended months of uncertainty. Outside, reporters waited on the courthouse steps, but Rachel and I walked past every microphone without stopping. There wasn't anything left to argue. The evidence had already spoken. Over the following months, the reservoir slowly came back to life. The damaged valve was replaced under the supervision of licensed engineers. The shoreline stabilized. Fresh reeds appeared where cracked mud had baked beneath the summer sun. After the first autumn rains, the water climbed steadily until it reached a familiar mark on the old concrete elevation scale. The same mark my father used to inspect every spring. One cold morning, I stood on top of the dam with a mug of coffee and watched 2 blue herons land near the eastern marsh. A week later, white-tailed deer returned at sunrise. By the following spring, Helicopters from the volunteer fire department were once again drawing water from the deepest section during wildfire training exercises. The reservoir wasn't simply repaired. It was trusted again. The HOA changed too. Residents voted out nearly the entire board. New leadership removed unnecessary rules, published financial records, and adopted procedures requiring independent legal review before any action affecting private property. Several neighbors stopped by over the next few months. Some apologized for believing the rumors. Others admitted they had been too intimidated to question Karen while she was in power. I never asked for apologies. People make mistakes. The important part is what they choose after the truth becomes impossible to ignore. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, I unlocked the old maintenance shed where my father's workbench still stood exactly as he had left it. The brass lamp, the faded notebooks, the steel hammer he used to tap the concrete and listen. I picked it up and walked out onto the crest of the dam. Just as he taught me years ago, I struck the concrete lightly. Once, twice. Then I closed my eyes. The structure answered with the same solid sound I remembered as a child. Strong, steady, unbroken. I smiled without realizing it. My father had always said that good engineering wasn't about building something impressive. It was about building something that quietly protected people long after everyone forgot who built it. Looking across the calm surface reflecting the evening sky, I finally understood what he meant. Karen believed power came from telling people what belonged to her. My father believed responsibility began with protecting what belonged to everyone else. In the end, the reservoir kept its memory. So did the court. And every time the wind ripples across that water, I remember a lesson worth far more than $12 million. Justice doesn't arrive with the loudest voice. It arrives when the truth is documented, the facts are preserved, and patience outlasts arrogance. The water returned. The wildlife returned. Peace returned. And that was the only victory I had ever wanted.